A cowboy sheltered Shivering Apache twin sisters, and his fate changed forever. The sun was already sinking behind the distant hills when the cowboy finished tying the last knot on the fence. The day had been long, and the air carried a sharp cold that warned of bad weather coming fast. He pulled his coat tighter around his shoulders and looked at the sky. Dark clouds were rolling in, heavy and low, swallowing the pale light of the evening. He had seen storms like this before, and he knew they could turn dangerous without much warning. The ranch was quiet as it always was. He lived far from town, far from other people. Most days, the only sounds were the wind, the horses, and his own footsteps. He had chosen this life years ago after losing the last of his family. Solitude felt safer. Out here, nothing could disappoint him. Nothing could leave. As he began walking toward the barn, the wind suddenly picked up. It cut through the open land like a blade. Dust and dry grass lifted into the air, stinging his face. Then, through the noise of the wind, he thought he heard something else. At first, he dismissed it as imagination. The storm was playing tricks on his ears. But then he heard it again, a faint sound almost like a cry carried weakly by the wind. He stopped walking. The cowboy stood still, listening carefully. His heart beat a little faster. Out here, sounds usually meant trouble or danger. He turned his head toward the old fence line near the edge of his property. The wind blew harder and the sound came again. This time, he was sure. It was not an animal. Without thinking too much, he grabbed a lantern from the barn and mounted his horse. The sky darkened quickly as he rode toward the fence line. Snowflakes began to fall, light at first, then heavier. The storm had arrived faster than expected. As he got closer, the lantern light revealed two small shapes huddled near the broken fence. They were barely moving. His heart dropped into his chest. He dismounted and approached slowly, speaking softly so he would not frighten them. When he got close enough, he saw they were two young girls, no older than 10 or 11. They looked almost identical, twin sisters. Their dark hair was tangled and wet with snow. Their clothes were thin and torn, completely unfit for the cold. They were holding onto each other, shaking uncontrollably. The cowboy knelt down carefully, keeping his hands visible. He could see the fear in their eyes. They pulled back slightly but did not try to run. They were too cold, too tired. "It's all right," he said gently. "You're safe now." They did not answer. One of them coughed weakly and the other tightened her grip around her sister. He noticed their features, their expressions, and realized they were Apache. His chest tightened. He knew enough history to understand what that meant. He also knew enough about the world to know they were likely running from something. The wind howled louder and snow fell faster. The storm was becoming dangerous. Standing out here any longer could cost them their lives. "We need to get you warm," he said, not expecting them to respond. "I've got a house nearby." For a moment they hesitated. Then one of the girls gave a small nod. It was barely noticeable, but it was enough. He wrapped his thick coat around both of them as best as he could. They were light, far too light for children their age. With great care, he lifted them onto his horse and walked beside them, holding onto the reins, shielding them from the wind with his own body as much as possible. The ride back to the ranch felt longer than usual. Snow whipped across his face and the cold seeped into his bones, but he did not slow down. His mind raced with thoughts he had not felt in years. Worry, responsibility, fear of what might come next. When they finally reached the cabin, he rushed them inside. The small house was simple but sturdy. He quickly started a fire, the flames cracking and popping as warmth filled the room. The twins sat near the fire, still shaking, their eyes wide as they took in their surroundings. He brought out blankets and wrapped them tightly. Then he placed a pot of water on the stove and added some herbs he used when winter colds hit hard. The smell was comforting, filling the room with something warm and familiar. Slowly, color began to return to their faces. One of the girls whispered something in a low voice, holding her sister's hand. The cowboy did not understand the words, but he understood the tone. Fear mixed with relief. "You're safe here," he repeated quietly. "No one will hurt you." They looked at him carefully, studying his face as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Years of loneliness had carved deep lines into his expression, but kindness still lived there. After a long moment, the older-looking twin relaxed slightly. He gave them warm soup and watched as they ate slowly, carefully, as if they were afraid the food might disappear. He made sure not to stare too much, not to overwhelm them. He remembered how fear worked, how silence sometimes felt safer than questions. Outside, the storm raged on, pounding against the walls of the cabin. Snow piled high against the windows. It was clear now that they could not leave even if they wanted to. As the fire crackled, the cowboy sat in a chair nearby, keeping watch. He thought about how close he had come to riding home without checking the fence line, how easily he could have ignored the sound. His hands clenched into fists as the weight of that realization settled in. For the first time in years, his quiet life had been interrupted. And deep down, he knew this interruption was not temporary. Something had shifted the moment he saw those two shivering figures in the snow. The twins eventually leaned against each other and drifted into a light sleep, exhaustion finally winning over fear. He gently added more blankets around them and lowered the lantern light. As he watched them sleep, the cowboy felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest, a sense of purpose, a sense that his life, once simple and empty, had taken a sudden turn. Outside, the storm continued to howl, but inside the cabin, warmth and quiet held steady. And though he did not yet know it, the choice he made that night, choosing compassion over caution, had already begun to change his fate forever. Morning came slowly to the small cabin. The storm outside had softened, but the cold still pressed against the wooden walls. Pale light slipped through the frost-covered window, landing gently on the floor near the fireplace. The fire had burned low during the night, leaving only warm embers behind. The cowboy woke up in his chair, his neck stiff and his back sore. He had not slept much. Every small sound had pulled him awake. He stood up quietly and stretched, then looked toward the corner where the twins were resting. They were still wrapped in blankets, lying close together like they were afraid to be separated even for a moment. For a few seconds, he simply watched them breathe. Slow, even, alive. Relief passed through him like a deep breath he did not realize he had been holding. He moved carefully, not wanting to scare them, and added more wood to the fire. As the flames grew, warmth returned to the room. He set water to heat and began preparing a simple breakfast. The familiar motions helped steady his thoughts, but his mind kept returning to the same question. What had these girls been running from? One of the twins stirred. Her eyes opened suddenly, sharp with fear. She sat up fast, pulling her blanket tighter. Her sister woke instantly, mirroring the movement. Both pairs of eyes locked onto him. "It's all right," he said softly, raising his hand slightly to show he meant no harm. "You're safe. You're still at my place." They did not relax right away. The fear was still there, deep and learned. He understood that kind of fear. It did not disappear just because someone spoke kindly. He placed a bowl of warm food on the table and stepped back, giving them space. "You can eat when you're ready." The older-looking twin whispered something to her sister. After a moment, they slowly stood and approached the table, still watching him carefully. They ate quietly, each small bite taken as if it mattered greatly. Silence filled the room, but it was not empty. It was heavy with unspoken things. After a while, the cowboy sat down again, keeping his distance. "My name is Daniel," he said gently. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to." They looked at each other again. The younger twin finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She said their names softly, one after the other. Simple names. Names that sounded worn, like they had been carried through hard days. Daniel nodded slowly. "It's good to meet you." That was all he said. He did not ask questions. He let the quiet return. As the morning passed, the twins slowly moved around the cabin. They touched objects carefully, like the chairs and shelves were fragile or dangerous. One of them stood near the window, staring outside at the white-covered land. Daniel watched them with a feeling he could not fully name. Protectiveness, maybe, or responsibility. He had never been responsible for anyone before, not like this. When one of the girls started coughing again, he felt a sharp worry rise in his chest. He brought her more warm water and sat nearby, listening until the sound eased. "You should rest today," he said. "The storm took a lot out of you." They nodded. Later that afternoon, the sound of distant horses drifted through the cold air. Daniel stiffened instantly. He stepped to the window and looked out. Far off near the main road, he saw figures moving slowly. Riders. His jaw tightened. He turned back to the girls and saw the fear already returning to their faces. They had heard it too. "No one's coming here," he said calmly, even though his heart had started to race. "You're all right." He closed the shutters gently and returned to his seat, positioning himself between them and the door without even thinking about it. The riders passed without stopping, but the tension lingered. The twins stayed close to the fire, whispering quietly to each other. Daniel realized then just how deeply afraid they were of being found. That night, as darkness fell again, one of the girls finally spoke more than a few words. Her voice trembled, but she forced the words out slowly. She explained in broken sentences that they had left someone who wanted to send them away. Somewhere they did not want to go. Somewhere unsafe. Daniel listened without interrupting. Every word tightened something inside him. "They were scared," she said, pressing her hand to her chest. "We ran," he nodded. "You did what you had to do." The relief in her eyes was small but real. Days passed quietly. The storm cleared, but the cold stayed. Daniel kept them inside, letting them rest, feeding them regularly, making sure they stayed warm. He showed them where the water was, where they could sit, where they could sleep safely. Trust did not arrive all at once. It came in pieces. A smile when he returned from the barn. A soft thank you when he handed them food. A moment when one of them fell asleep near him without pulling away. At night, he slept lightly, always aware of the door, the wind, and the possibility of someone coming to ask questions. On the fourth day, Daniel rode into town early and returned before noon. He brought back warmer clothes and supplies, careful not to attract attention. He said nothing about the girls. No one asked. Still, he felt eyes on him longer than usual. When he gave the twins the clothes, they stared at them in silence. Then, without warning, the younger one stepped forward and hugged him quickly, then pulled back as if embarrassed. Daniel froze for a second, then gently placed a hand on her shoulder. His throat tightened. That night, as the fire burned low, Daniel sat awake, staring into the flames. He thought about the life he had built alone, how simple it had been, how quiet, and how impossible it felt now to imagine sending them away. Outside, the land remained wide and empty, but inside the cabin something had changed. Fear still lived there, but so did trust. Fragile, growing trust. Daniel did not know what the future held. He only knew one thing for certain. He would not abandon them. Whatever came next, he would face it standing right where he was. The next week moved slowly, but the tension around the cabin grew heavier with each passing day. The land outside looked calm again. Snow melted into thin streams and the sky returned to its pale winter blue. But Daniel felt uneasy. Trouble did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it crept in quietly, carried by whispers and curious eyes. The twins were stronger now. Color had returned to their faces and their steps were steadier. Still, they stayed close to each other and rarely moved far from Daniel. The cabin had become their safe place, and Daniel had become the center of that safety, whether he had planned it or not. One morning, Daniel rode into town to trade supplies. As soon as he tied his horse, he sensed something was different. Conversation stopped when he walked past. A few people nodded politely, but their eyes lingered longer than usual. He heard his name spoken softly behind him. At the supply store, the owner leaned closer than necessary. "Saw tracks near your place last week," the man said casually. "Looked like more than one person." Daniel kept his face calm. "Storm moves things around," he replied. "Hard to tell what's what after that kind of weather." The man studied him for a moment, then shrugged. "Maybe." Daniel finished his business quickly and left town without stopping anywhere else. The ride back felt longer than usual. His thoughts raced. Someone had noticed. It had only been a matter of time. When he reached the cabin, the twins were waiting near the door. Relief washed over him the moment he saw them safe, but their faces told him they already sensed his worry. "They were asking," he said gently, once inside. "But no one knows anything." The older twin looked down. "They always ask," she said quietly. That night Daniel sat by the fire long after the girls had gone to sleep. The flames danced, but his mind was restless. He thought about the town, about rules, about how people treated those they did not understand. He knew what the easy choice would be. He could take the girls somewhere else, leave them with people whose job it was to decide their future, walk away and return to his quiet life. But the thought made his chest feel tight. The next day, 2 riders appeared on the far edge of his land. Daniel noticed them from the barn. His body stiffened instantly. He watched as they stopped, scanned the area, then turned back toward the road. They did not approach, but the message was clear. They were looking. When Daniel returned to the cabin, the twins were sitting close together, their hands intertwined. "They're getting closer, aren't they?" the younger one asked. Daniel did not lie. "Yes," he said. "But that doesn't mean you're not safe." The words sounded strong, but inside he felt the weight of the promise he was making. That evening he decided it was time to talk openly. He sat across from them at the table, his hands folded. "I need you to listen," he said softly. "I won't force you to do anything, but things may get harder before they get easier." The older twin nodded. "We know." He took a slow breath. "People may come asking questions. They may want me to step aside. I need to know what you want." The sisters looked at each other for a long time. Finally, the younger one spoke. "We don't want to be sent away," she said. "We want to stay where we are safe." Daniel nodded slowly. "Then I'll do everything I can to make that happen." From that moment on, his choice became clear. There was no turning back. Over the next few days, visitors came to the edge of his property more often. Some were curious. Some pretended to be friendly. Daniel answered politely but shared nothing. He stayed calm, firm, and careful with his words. At night, he checked the doors twice. He slept lightly, listening to every sound outside. One afternoon, a man from town arrived on horseback and stopped near the gate. He called out Daniel's name. Daniel stepped outside, leaving the door slightly open behind him. "I've heard things," the man said, "about strangers." Daniel met his gaze. "People pass through these lands all the time." The man narrowed his eyes. "You living alone out here makes folks uneasy." Daniel's voice stayed steady. "I've lived alone for years, never been a problem before." The man studied him, then sighed. "Just be careful," he said. "Some folks don't like surprises." After the man left, Daniel stood still for a long time, staring at the empty road. He knew that warning was not meant kindly. That night, the older twin had a bad dream. She woke shaking, calling out softly. Daniel sat beside her until her breathing slowed. She did not pull away when he rested his hand near hers. "You won't leave us, will you?" she asked, her voice small. "No," he said without hesitation. "I won't." The words settled deep inside him, firm and unbreakable. The following morning, Daniel noticed fresh tracks near the fence again. This time they were closer. He knew a decision would soon be forced upon him. Instead of fear, something else rose inside him: determination. He had lived a quiet life long enough. He had avoided conflict, avoided connection, avoided responsibility. But now, standing in the doorway of his cabin, watching the twins move carefully around the room, he understood something clearly. Some choices define a person, and he had already made his. Whatever came next, questions, pressure, judgment, he would face it. Not as a lonely cowboy hiding on the edge of the land, but as someone standing for what was right. The cabin was no longer just a shelter. It was a promise. The tension that had been slowly building finally reached the cabin one cold morning. Daniel sensed it before he saw anything. The air felt heavy, like the land itself was holding its breath. He had just finished feeding the horses when the sound of approaching hooves broke the quiet. 3 riders came into view, moving steadily toward the gate. They did not rush, but they did not hesitate either. Daniel wiped his hands on his coat and stood still, watching. Inside the cabin, the twins noticed his stillness. They stepped closer to the window, their faces pale. "They're here," the older one whispered. Daniel turned and met their eyes. "Stay inside," he said gently, "no matter what you hear." He stepped outside and closed the door behind him, standing firmly on the porch. The riders stopped a short distance away. 2 were men he recognized from town. The third wore a clean coat and carried himself with authority. The man in the clean coat spoke first. "Daniel," he said calmly, "we need to talk." Daniel nodded once. "You can talk right there." The man's mouth tightened slightly, but he did not argue. "We've had reports," he said, "about 2 young girls staying here." Daniel crossed his arms. "This is my land." "Yes," the man replied, "but those girls didn't come from nowhere. People are asking questions." Daniel's voice stayed steady. "They needed shelter, I gave it." One of the men from town shifted uncomfortably. "You know how this looks," he said. "Folks are uneasy." Daniel looked at him directly. "Uneasy doesn't mean wrong." The clean-coated man stepped forward a little. "We're not here to cause trouble," he said. "We just need to ensure everything is proper." Daniel felt anger rise, but he kept it under control. "They're safe," he said. "That's proper enough for me," the man sighed. "You don't get to decide everything on your own." Daniel took a slow breath. "Out here I always have." Behind the door, the twins listened, their hands clasped tightly together. Every word felt like it might pull them back into the fear they had escaped. The clean-coated man glanced at the cabin. "We need to speak to them." "No," Daniel said firmly, "not without a reason. And not without care." The man studied Daniel's face for a long moment. Something shifted in his expression. "You're willing to stand in the way?" he asked. Daniel did not hesitate. "Yes." Silence stretched between them. The wind moved across the land, carrying dust and cold air. Finally, the man nodded slowly. "We'll return," he said. "This isn't finished." Daniel watched them ride away, his muscles tight until they disappeared over the hill. Only then did he allow himself to breathe. When he went back inside, the twins rushed to him. They did not speak at first. They just stood close, as if afraid the ground might open beneath them. "They didn't take us," the younger one said softly, like she needed to hear the words out loud. "No," Daniel replied, "and they won't today." But he knew this was only the beginning. Over the next days, more people came by. Some asked polite questions. Some offered advice he did not want. Others brought warnings wrapped in concern. Daniel listened, answered little, and held his ground. What surprised him most was that not everyone stood against him. One afternoon, an older woman from town arrived with a basket of food. She placed it quietly on the porch. "You're doing what others wouldn't," she said. "That matters." Daniel nodded, unsure what to say. Another day, a neighbor stopped by and fixed part of the broken fence without being asked. "Storm damage," the man said casually, but his eyes told a deeper truth. Slowly, support appeared in small, quiet ways. Inside the cabin, the twins began to relax again, though fear still lingered close. They helped with small chores, sweeping the floor, warming water, feeding the chickens. Their laughter returned in short bursts, like something fragile being tested. One evening, as they sat by the fire, the older twin looked at Daniel seriously. "Why are you helping us?" she asked. Daniel thought for a long moment. "Because someone once helped me," he said, "and because it's right." She nodded, accepting the answer without more questions. But trouble was not finished. A week later, the clean-coated man returned, this time with papers and more people. Daniel met them outside again, his stance calm but unyielding. "We're moving forward," the man said. "This has gone on long enough." Daniel's heart pounded, but his voice stayed level. "You haven't proven they'd be safer anywhere else." The man hesitated. "That's not for you to decide." Daniel stepped closer. "Then listen to this," he said. "They were cold, scared, and alone when I found them. They're safe now. If you take them without care, you'll do harm." A murmur passed through the group. One of the men shifted his weight, uneasy. From inside the cabin, the twins watched through a crack in the door, their eyes wide. The older woman from town appeared then, standing a little distance away. "He's right," she said clearly. "I've seen the girls. They're well." Another voice joined, then another. The clean-coated man raised his hand, surprised. He looked around, realizing this was no longer a simple matter. After a long pause, he lowered his papers. "We'll reassess," he said, "for now." The relief that washed over Daniel was powerful, but he did not show it. He simply nodded. That night the twins cried quietly, releasing days of fear they had been holding inside. Daniel sat nearby, not speaking, just present. When the crying stopped, the younger one reached out and held his hand. "You didn't let them take us," she said. Daniel squeezed her hand gently. "I told you I won't." As the fire burned low, Daniel realized something important. He was no longer standing alone. The land, the people, and the small family forming inside his cabin were connected now. The fight was not over. He knew that. But he also knew he was exactly where he needed to be, standing his ground. The weeks that followed felt different, quieter in a steady way. The cold season slowly loosened its grip on the land. Snow melted from the hills and the ground softened beneath the sun. With each passing day, the cabin felt less like a hiding place and more like a home. Daniel noticed the change in the twins before anything else. They slept through the night now. Their shoulders were not always tense. Sometimes he even heard them laugh when they thought he was busy outside. It was a soft sound, but it filled the cabin with warmth stronger than the fire ever could. The people from town stopped coming so often. When they did pass by, their questions were fewer, their voices calmer. Whatever decisions were being made elsewhere, time was working quietly in Daniel's favor. One morning, Daniel returned from the barn to find the twins standing on the porch, watching the sunrise. They stood side by side, their faces lifted toward the light. "It's pretty," the younger one said. "Yes," Daniel replied, "it is." He realized then that they were no longer just surviving. They were beginning to live. As spring settled in, small routines formed. The twins helped gather eggs, sweep the cabin, and tend the small garden Daniel had once planted for no real reason. Now it mattered. Every seed placed in the ground felt like a promise of something lasting. One afternoon, a letter arrived. Daniel read it slowly, his expression serious. The twins watched him, fear flickering briefly in their eyes. "It's all right," he said after a moment. "They're not coming to take you away." The relief on their faces was instant and overwhelming. The letter explained that the matter would not be pushed further. There were conditions, steps to follow, but no urgency, no threat. It was not perfect, but it was enough. That evening, Daniel cooked a bigger meal than usual. The twins ate with smiles, their voices filling the room. When the plates were cleared, the older twin looked at him quietly. "You stayed," she said. Daniel nodded. "I did." She swallowed, then spoke again. "You changed our lives." Daniel felt a tightness in his chest. "You changed mine too," he said honestly. Later that night, after the twins had gone to sleep, Daniel sat alone by the fire. He thought about the man he had been before the storm. Quiet, closed off, existing but not truly living. He realized he did not miss that life at all. The land outside remained wide and open, but he no longer felt small within it. Purpose had taken root where loneliness once lived. Months passed. The twins grew stronger. They learned the rhythm of ranch life, the way the land spoke through weather and wind. They asked questions, now curious ones, about horses, about stars, about Daniel's past. He answered what he could, gently and simply. One day, while fixing the fence together, the younger twin looked up at him. "Are we family?" she asked. Daniel froze for a second. Then he smiled. "Yes," he said, "if you want to be." She grinned and returned to her work like it was the most natural thing in the world. From that day on, the word did not need to be spoken again. It lived in their actions, in shared meals, in quiet evenings, in the way they looked out for one another. People in town began to see it too. Not rumors, not stories, just a man and two girls living honestly on the land. Slowly, respect replaced suspicion. One afternoon, the older woman from town visited again. She stood on the porch and looked around, her eyes soft. "You did good," she said. Daniel nodded. "We did." As the sun dipped low, Daniel stood outside watching the twins race each other across the open field, their laughter carried by the wind. The same land that once felt empty now felt full. He understood something important then. Fate did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it came quietly, wrapped in a storm, shivering at a broken fence, waiting for someone to choose kindness. Daniel had chosen, and in doing so he had gained more than he ever imagined. Not just a changed fate, but a life worth living.